Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the economy and manufacturing, but what about the COVID-19 vaccine in Pennsylvania? As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have a wide array of important topics to talk about, and joining me, sitting across from me, are two great journalists, actually. Angela Couloumbis, she's with the Philadelphia Inquirer in Spotlight, Pennsylvania, and Marc Levy, he's with the Associated Press. Well, Marc, let's start with you. COVID-19, I mean, you can try and try if you're eligible to receive the vaccine, and you get nowhere right now. And some folks look at Governor Wolf and say, well, it's a Pennsylvania problem. Others say, no, it's not a Pennsylvania problem. It's a supply problem brought on by the federal government's mishandling of the vaccine distribution. But the fact of the matter is, it's a serious problem. Point number one, and then I'll let you take over. When they added to 1A, folks 65 and over and people with special medical health problems, 3 million more Pennsylvanians were eligible. What's
right.
The story?
And so, to be fair, this is happening in every state. People are calling to their medical providers or a state portal to try to sign up, and they're waiting for hours and then getting bumped off, or they can't find an appointment or a slot. And the governor came out this week and said, look, we were promised more vaccine. The Trump administration overpromised when the federal government advised states to bring in the elderly and people with medical conditions into the first vaccination phase. So at the current rate, if nothing improves and the state keeps getting what it's getting from the federal government, it'll take until later this year, late into the year, to get through this first phase, which is healthcare workers, people 65 and older, and people 16 to 64 who have a certain sort of medical condition or vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the things, and I think every reporter is experiencing this, we are getting inundated with emails and phone calls, basically complaints about the system in Pennsylvania not being centralized, not being able to go on a very specific portal and sign up, and when your turn is available, you can go in. There are drawbacks to that system too, but one of the things that we consistently hear, and I think one of the things that the governor addressed this week, is that Pennsylvania does not have that centralized system. It's more decentralized. You, as a resident, have some responsibility to contact your health care provider in order to get these appointments, but that he would be open to the idea going forward of a more centralized sign-up system if supply obviously begins to increase at rates that can meet the demand.
Yeah. Well, I talked to a lot of folks who tell me there are 4 or 5 sites that they've signed up for, and every time, call back tomorrow or log in tomorrow and they say it's filled or we don't have any vaccine available.
Yeah, and this rollout is also relying on healthcare systems, hospitals, who independently are reaching out to their patients as well and letting them know that vaccine is available when it's their turn or somewhere down the line. And the health commissioner of Philadelphia said that's going to be a big part of the rollout, but he also acknowledged that there's problems with that because not everyone is a patient right now at a health system or in touch with their hospital.
All right, let's turn to another subject. I'll tell you, it's hard to keep track of what's going on with constitutional amendments that are moving through the legislature with other activity. And some of this could reach the voters, which will have to make a decision up or down on some of these amendments and other issues that could come before them at the primary on May 18th. So what are a couple of the most important ones?
Yeah, there are a couple of controversial ones. The first one is basically a direct response by Republicans to frustrations that they had last year over the governor's executive powers under a disaster declaration. And obviously the coronavirus was one of those. So one of the potential questions could be asking voters to decide whether the legislature should have the power to end a disaster declaration if it sees fit. Right now, the way it currently works, disaster declarations last for 90 days, and the governor can extend them indefinitely.
Now, before you go on, here's a follow-up. Does that have to do with the COVID-19 restrictions that the governor put on the economy?
That and other, yes, basically the mitigation measures. But one of the biggest frustrations, at least early on, were his business closures, and also stay-at-home orders were also very much a target of Republicans who really felt that counties should be in a position to make those kinds of decisions.
All right, we're going to run to a break, but there's several more that I want to talk about. We'll be back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, I'm chatting with journalist Angela Couloumbis and Marc Levy. All right, Marc. Your turn.
Yeah, one last point about the governor's constitutional amendment on the governor's disaster powers is that the governor is saying that it would not affect his power to issue a school shutdown order, a business shutdown order, to impose social distancing requirements on businesses and people, like stay-at-home orders.
Sure.
The second one that we expect to be on the ballot on May 18th deals with opening a 2-year window for child sexual abuse survivors to sue either their perpetrators or institutions that may have covered it up. Now, this stems from sexual abuse investigations into the Catholic Church. There was a landmark grand jury report in 2018 by the State Attorney General's office. And what this involves is basically people who, when they became adults or turned 20 or 30, depending on how old they were, lost the ability to sue in court to sue for damages. And so this would give them that 2-year window to go back and sue. And
is that controversial?
It has been controversial because the state tried to do it, Democrats tried to do it in the legislature, and Republicans in the Senate blocked it.
Right.
And this has been going on for years since for about 2 decades we've seen iterations of this, but particularly in the last 5 years since a grand jury report came out in 2016 on the Johnstown Altoona diocese.
So another vote that the public might be asked to weigh in on.
Yes.
On the primary in May.
That's right.
You have another one?
Yes, there is potentially another one. There is an effort to have appellate judges that are now elected statewide be elected by district, and districts drawn by the legislature. Democrats hate the idea. They call it judicial gerrymandering. Republicans feel that it is a necessary step to make the bench more diverse geographically, potentially, because right now the system, they argue, favors candidates from large areas of the state, i.e. Philadelphia. So that was had a lot of momentum starting at the beginning of January. It's kind of fizzling a little bit, so I think there's a big question mark over whether it's going to end up on the May ballot or not.
Yeah. What other big issues are before? I'll tell you what. All of a sudden, the legislature, the Republicans, and we're not being negative about it. We're just citing the obvious that the Republicans are moving a whole bunch of legislation dealing with a wide variety of topics, right, Marc? And, some people think, this is kind of surprising.
Well, they've been signaling this for some time, and they had very serious problems with the governor. Last year was an extremely ugly year in the state capitol over the virus, with the governor vetoing legislation that Republicans sent, and with Trump on the ballot, Republicans in swing states were trying to pin blame for the virus on the Democratic governors, and Democrats were trying to pin blame for the virus response on Trump. So it was an extremely ugly year, and we've seen this getting signaled over and over again by Republicans that they were going to aim for the Constitution to make changes where they couldn't in law because, the governor, Democrat Tom Wolf, has stood in their way.
Yeah. And when you deal with a constitutional amendment, it doesn't require the governor's signature, so they don't have to worry about a gubernatorial veto.
That's right. It has to pass, the bill has to pass in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and then it goes to the voters. I think you mentioned big issues. I think another big issue that is carried over from 2020 is elections and how the state is administering elections now that there is a mail-in law and voting law. And you've seen already hearings occur on the Hill about election integrity and how the 2020 general election was carried out. I think you're going to continue hearing that in the weeks to come.
Well, look, I want to thank you both for the update, and we'll see you soon. All right, coming up, let's take a look at manufacturing and the economy and some other important topics, and we'll deal with that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, joining me is David Taylor. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, and he's the guy who knows. We bring him in to talk about manufacturing, since that's your job, right?
Yes,
to
sir.
understand what's going on. Well, COVID-19, it's obvious that it's affected retail stores, restaurants, bars, salons. I mean, and they're still closing. What's the story with manufacturing in our state?
Well, I mean, the manufacturing sector is also affected by those businesses, because a lot of those businesses are part either of the manufacturing supply chain, or they're vendors to manufacturing, or they're part of the distribution network. So, I mean, manufacturing nationally it continues to come back relatively strong. Pennsylvania perhaps not quite as strong as the overall national profile. But, I mean, the most important thing here is safely reopening the economy, and a heavy emphasis on the safely part of it. And to achieve these ends, we need businesses and individuals to get vaccinated, which means we need to get the vaccine to them so they can be inoculated, but also that we need to safely reopen the economy by having businesses follow all of the CDC protocols. And we also need businesses to be willing to reopen. And this, of course, Terry, comes back to the same topic that I've spoken about before, which is that we need to have common sense, safe harbor liability protections for businesses.
Explain
for COVID.
what that means.
So what it means is that if a business follows the CDC guidelines and does masks and social distancing and hand sanitizer and plexiglass and all those other things that we know people need to do to minimize exposure to the virus. But for those businesses that do that and can prove that they're doing it, that they should be protected from frivolous lawsuits. To say if somebody got sick during the pandemic, the presumption would be that you didn't get sick at the place where all those protections were in place. Most other states have done this. The General Assembly passed a bill and the Governor Wolf vetoed it. Every organization in Harrisburg, every trade association down to the Farm Bureau and the YMCAs and the independent colleges and universities were for this bill, and the governor vetoed it. We are not going to be able to safely restart the economy until those protections are in place.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not easy to determine where someone, I know about the tracing and all of that, but sometimes it's not easy to know where you picked it up.
Well,
Am I right?
That's exactly right, Terry. And that's the very definition of the word pandemic. Pan means universal, and demic means of the people, of the demos. So a pandemic by definition is everywhere, and that's why our economy, our society, all Pennsylvanians deserve these temporary common sense protections from frivolous lawsuits.
All right, we're going to run to a break, and we come back. I want to talk about the carbon tax. And as you know, President of the United States, Joe Biden, has done, attacking, as he sees it, climate change. And we also have a carbon tax from Governor Wolf, and we'll talk about that. And we'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, let's talk. We're going to talk about climate change and the environment. Obviously, Republicans and Democrats in the main have big differences on this, the business community. So, David, let's turn to Governor Wolf's carbon tax. What should our viewers know about that?
Well, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a coalition of states that have joined into a compact where they're imposing a tax on carbon emissions and creating a cap and trade program. Pennsylvania does not need this because Pennsylvania has actually reduced emissions by a greater amount and at a greater rate than the states inside the compact. I mean, Terry, why this is important, viewers need to understand Pennsylvania is America's #1 exporter of electricity. California is the #1 importer. Pennsylvania is the #1 exporting producer of electricity. We power this entire Mid-Atlantic region and New England and the Midwest.
So how is that energy produced?
Well, actually, we have a quite varied industry with electricity generation. That we have natural gas, we have coal, we have nuclear power, and those things are roughly equal. Coal going down, natural gas increasing. On the margin, there's a very small percentage that's produced by wind and solar and biomass and geothermal and whatever else there might be. But the real workhorses are coal and natural gas and nuclear. And so Governor Wolf is seeking to unilaterally enter Pennsylvania into this compact to impose a carbon tax on the electricity generating sector. The effect that this would have would be to amputate what remains of Pennsylvania's coal-fired electricity generation. And you got to keep in mind that these plants are in compliance with every DEP and EPA standard, that these are the plants where the owners invested hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade the facilities to be in compliance with the new, tighter Obama-era EPA standards. And so Governor Wolf wants to move the goalposts again, and that this would destroy those facilities which are based in Indiana, Armstrong, and Cambria counties, and this would be a devastating loss for those communities.
Now, it doesn't affect natural gas, correct?
Well, it affects everything in the electricity generating sector, including natural gas, and so that there are older, less efficient natural gas plants, which, although they're in compliance with all standards today, that they would be affected economically and probably wiped out because of moving the goalposts.
But in general, Governor Wolf has been a supporter of the natural gas. Now, he wants to do a second tax on it. But overall, in general, he's been a supporter of it. Yes, no?
No. I mean, it's the governor has grudgingly recognized the existence of this leading industry in Pennsylvania. He's done little or nothing to actually help develop it, sustain it, grow it. And so, and obviously an additional tax on the industry would be counterproductive and stupid. But this carbon tax on the whole power generating sector is it's a terrible idea. It's deeply damaging, and Terry, as you can imagine, there aren't many occasions where AFL-CIO and PMA are in agreement on something. But we are both part of the Power PA Jobs Alliance, which has sent thousands of missives to the Environmental Quality Board about this plan.
David, are you saying that the legislature doesn't have to approve this?
Well, the legislature should have to approve it because it's the imposition of a tax. However, the governor is asserting that he has authority that I personally don't believe that he has. And in fact, not only does the legislature not approve that there was legislation that passed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan fashion, insisting that the legislative branch needs to be included in this, and of course, Governor Wolf vetoed it.
Well, how many different ways can you say Pennsylvania appeals court system?
Well, and it's the, ultimately, the energy opportunity in Pennsylvania is the one opportunity that is big enough, powerful enough to give Pennsylvania the kind of economic rebound that we need coming out of the pandemic. And so for the Wolf administration to wage war against this sector and all of the people it employs and all of the positive economic contribution that results from it is just very badly wrong-headed, and we are going to fight till we win, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. Well, this past week, President Biden reiterated his support for natural gas, and there's a big issue with the Keystone XL pipeline, and the president saying it's done.
He pulled the permit to disallow the project.
Exactly. So what's the future? I mean, natural gas is a big part of the economy, particularly out in the southwestern part of our state. So what's the future with all this?
Well, I mean, it's a world historic opportunity. I mean, and people need to realize, because of Pennsylvania's contribution through the Marcellus Shale to America's energy portfolio, America is now #1 in the world in natural gas. Terry, I was just a little kid, but I remember the OPEC boycott in the 70s and the gas lines and all that stuff that American energy independence has been a goal of our government, of our people for these many years. And now that we finally achieved that very important standing in the world, you have the Biden administration looking to throw it all away. It's deeply, deeply wrong-headed. And then in particular, the Keystone XL pipeline, in fact, the part of it that crosses the border was already built. And so you have a terrible diplomatic row with our next-door neighbor, our largest trading partner, our closest ally. You're unemploying, many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people up there, and many more down here in the U.S. And ultimately, what are they going to do? They're going to pave British Columbia and ship that oil to the coast and send it off to Asia. And so, when our Canadian friends offer us right of first refusal on this energy, it's something that for our energy security, for our economy, and our relationship with our closest ally that we should embrace.
Thank you. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.